The richest brother trio that quietly dominates Michigan. That's exactly what we're getting into right now. All right. Picture Western Michigan for a second. Gray skies in winter, lake effect wind, long suburban roads, big parking lots, families making the same practical weekend run they've been making for years. Somebody needs groceries. Somebody needs cold medicine. Somebody forgot a birthday card. The dog is out of food. The car needs washer fluid. There's a graduation party on Saturday and nobody wants to make 3 separate stops. And quietly, sitting behind that whole routine is one of the richest brother trios in America. Not in New York, not in Los Angeles, not in some polished private equity tower in Chicago. In Michigan, we are talking about Hank Meyer, Doug Meyer, and Mark Meyer, 3 brothers tied to a family machine so deeply embedded in ordinary life that millions of people help feed their fortune without even thinking about it. And that is what makes this story so good. Because this is not a loud empire. It is not built on celebrity, tech hype, or a founder with a podcast voice and a God complex. It is built on repetition, habit, land, patience, regional loyalty, private control. The brothers are wealthy in the way that actually lasts. The kind of wealth people underestimate because it looks too normal from the outside. That is the first trick in this whole story. People hear the name Meyer and think, sure, big Midwestern store, I know the place. They do not stop and ask what it means for one family to privately control a retail system that has shaped shopping patterns across multiple states for decades. They do not stop and ask what kind of money sits behind that many stores, that much real estate, that much distribution, that much customer routine, and that much family discipline. Depending on the year, the brothers have each been estimated in the multi-billion-dollar range, and the broader family fortune has been placed deep into the tens of billions. That is not local rich. That is not known around town rich. That is dynasty rich. That is private airfield rich. That is one family's company is part of the physical infrastructure of a region rich. And the truly important detail is that this is largely private wealth connected to a private company. Public companies get watched every quarter like nervous zoo animals. A private family empire plays a different game. It can think longer. It can absorb more. Like a lot of serious American fortunes, this one starts in a way that feels almost too simple to be real. The family business traces back to Hendrik Meyer, a Dutch immigrant who began as a barber and later opened a grocery store in Greenville, Michigan in 1934. A Depression-era grocer does not sound like the start of a modern empire, but that is exactly the point. Strong dynasties usually begin with something practical, useful, hard to glamorize. Food is useful, convenience is useful, a store people can count on is useful. Then, Fred Meyer, the next major force in the story, helped transform the family business into something much more ambitious. He understood early that customers did not want 10 separate errands if they could avoid them. The company leaned into the supercenter idea before a lot of America fully understood how powerful that model could become. That matters because the brothers did not simply inherit money. They inherited strategic DNA. They inherited a company built around scale, family control, customer habit, and regional understanding. By the time Hank, Doug, and Mark took their places in the wider structure, they were not standing around some sleepy legacy business hoping nostalgia would protect it. This is where most rich families usually start breaking apart. One sibling wants cash. One wants status. One wants to become transformational. One decides the old business is boring. Somebody's spouse has new ideas. Somebody's advisor says the family should unlock value. Somebody starts using words like liquidity event in a room where nobody should ever say liquidity event. That is how inherited fortunes begin to split at the seams. But the Meyer brothers seem to have understood something essential. They did not need identical personalities to preserve identical interests. Hank spent years in the CEO role and became a visible operational face of the business. Doug served deeply in leadership and co-chairman roles. Mark maintained a quieter posture while remaining tied to the ownership structure and also pursuing ventures like Life EMS. Different public profiles, same central reality. None of that matters if the family loses the core. The reason this trio became so formidable is not because they were loud, charismatic brothers doing magazine covers together. It is because they kept the center of gravity where it needed to be. The company stayed the company. The asset stayed the asset. And that is exactly why the fortune is so dangerous. Dangerous, in this case, meaning resilient. The brothers do not depend on one flashy category, one viral trend, one hot app, one celebrity partnership, or one fragile luxury market. They make money from the things people buy when life is simply continuing. Groceries, prescriptions, detergent, paper towels, school snacks, cheap shirts, grilling, charcoal, mulch, batteries, birthday wrapping paper, cereal at 10 p.m., cough syrup at 7 a.m. The more ordinary the need, the more powerful the business becomes. Because ordinary needs repeat. That is what so many people underestimate about retail dynasties. They hear the word store and imagine a lower status business compared with software or finance. But when the store becomes the place where millions of people perform ordinary life over and over and over again, that boring business becomes a cash machine attached to human routine itself. The brothers are not selling aspiration. They are selling continuity. They are getting paid because families keep existing, kids keep growing, winters keep coming, weekends keep filling up with little emergencies. If you really want to understand how a family quietly dominates a state, stop staring at the products and start staring at the parking lots. Large format retail is a real estate strategy disguised as a shopping trip. Every store sits on land that had to be chosen, bought, developed, permitted, connected, and defended. Every location changes traffic patterns. Every giant box influences what opens nearby, what roads get widened, which intersections become important, where gas stations go, where chain restaurants cluster, where smaller businesses try to piggyback on the customer flow. Over time, that creates a map of power. The Meyer brothers are not just tied to a retailer, they are tied to a system of land positions spread across markets that matter to everyday Midwestern life. That is a very different kind of wealth from abstract stock ownership. This is physical, visible, geographically anchored wealth. Even when retail headlines get dramatic about changing consumer behavior, the land still matters. The footprint still matters. Distribution still matters. Familiarity still matters. You cannot digitally erase decades of carefully planted regional presence just because analysts get excited about the next thing. Any regional retail family that stays rich in America deserves attention, but one that stays rich in the age of Walmart deserves real respect. Walmart is not a competitor in the casual sense. It is a force of nature. It compresses margins, dominates supply chains, outscales most rivals, and makes entire sectors feel as if gravity itself has entered the room. Plenty of regional operators have spent decades asking the same terrified question: how do we survive in a world where Walmart exists? The Meyer answer was not to pretend they could conquer every market or become a national cultural obsession. The answer was to hold their lanes so firmly that dislodging them would require far more than a generic big box challenge. They understood their region, they understood their customer. They understood how habit and convenience protect a brand. When people trust the experience enough, they also enjoyed the advantage of private control, which meant they were not constantly being pushed into short-term theatrics for the sake of public market applause. That matters. It is a lot easier to defend a business patiently when strangers cannot scream at you every 90 days through earnings commentary. Meyer's continued relevance in the same retail universe as Walmart tells you the brothers were not caretakers of a museum piece. They were guardians of a machine strong enough to survive one of the harshest commercial environments in the country. Some families get rich in a place, but never feel native to it. Their money lands there, but their instincts belong somewhere else. The Meyer brothers feel different. Their style makes sense in Michigan. This is a state with industrial memory, practical habits, and a long-standing suspicion of empty swagger. Michigan respects scale, but it does not always respect showmanship. It respects competence. It respects getting the job done. It respects people who understand the landscape without trying to cosplay as visionaries from somewhere flashier. That cultural fit matters more than people think. Quiet wealth can compound more comfortably in a place where understatement is not a weakness, but a regional language. The brothers do not need to behave like national celebrity tycoons because their power does not come from audience capture. It comes from embedded relevance. People in the Midwest often want value without chaos, familiarity without pretension, size without theatrical self-importance. That is precisely the emotional lane this family has occupied for decades. They are not just operating in Michigan. Another reason the trio quietly dominates Michigan is that the influence does not stop when the customer leaves the store. Wealth on this scale radiates outward. It shapes philanthropy. It shapes institutions. It shapes boardrooms, civic projects, cultural spaces, and regional prestige. The Meyer name is not just a commercial name. It is a civic name. It shows up in gardens, donations, development, healthcare support, education, and the kinds of public-facing projects that help turn private wealth into a semi-permanent regional presence. That matters, because once a family's identity moves beyond the company and into the broader visual and cultural fabric of the region, the family ceases to be merely a business owner. It becomes part of the place's architecture of influence. People may not agree with every wealthy family's choices, but they recognize the gravity. In West Michigan especially, that gravity is real. It helps explain why the brothers can remain low noise, yet high impact. They do not need constant media visibility. The regional ecosystem already knows who they are. The commercial ecosystem knows. The civic ecosystem knows. The philanthropic ecosystem knows. Quiet dominance becomes easier when the whole state has already adjusted to the fact that your family is part of the furniture. This is the part that fascinates me most. If you describe the Meyer Empire badly, it sounds almost dull. A family-owned regional retailer, large stores, Midwestern footprint, multi-state operations. Great, fine. But if you describe it honestly, it becomes clear that the brothers are sitting on something incredibly powerful. Repeated permission to enter the routine lives of millions of people. Think about how hard that is to earn. Most companies get a narrow window into your life. A streaming service gets your evening. A bank gets your paycheck. A rideshare app gets your occasional transportation problem. A big regional retailer can get your breakfast food, your prescriptions, your gardening season, your holiday decorations, your gas stop, your pet supplies, your emergency batteries, your school week, your cold season, your last-minute hosting panic, and your impulse spending all in the same month. That is not just retail. That is behavioral territory. Once a company becomes woven into that many recurring moments, the family controlling it is no longer rich by accident. It is rich because it has managed to install itself inside the rhythm of ordinary existence. There is also a psychological advantage in being underestimated. Families that dominate glamorous industries tend to attract constant analysis, envy, political scrutiny, and copycats. Families attached to regionally familiar retail often get flattened in the public imagination into something much smaller than they really are. That works in the Meyer brothers' favor. A lot of people mentally file the company under big local store and move on, which means they never fully process the size of the capital base, the resilience of the customer habit, or the protective strength of the real estate footprint. Quiet fortunes love that kind of misreading. If the public keeps mistaking a strategic empire for a useful shopping stop, the family gets to keep compounding power behind a mask of normalcy. That is one reason this story matters. The brothers are a reminder that some of the strongest fortunes in America are not sitting behind futuristic branding. They are hiding in plain sight behind places people visit in sweatpants, grabbing paper towels, frozen pizza, toothpaste, and one more thing they absolutely did not plan to buy. This may be their most underrated achievement. They did not break the machine trying to look brilliant. That deserves more credit than it gets. A lot of heirs want to prove they are visionaries rather than custodians. They get restless, they drift, they start believing the family fortune is a launching pad for reinvention rather than a structure that must be protected. Suddenly, the core asset is neglected while everyone chases prestige projects, overcomplicated expansion strategies, or some completely unnecessary attempt to look modern in front of other rich people. The Meyer brothers seem to have resisted that temptation. They did not need to become media personalities. They did not need to turn the company into a laboratory for ego. They did not need to sell the family's position to earn applause from the financial class. They mostly did the harder thing. They preserved the value of what already worked, while keeping it relevant enough to continue compounding. That is not sexy work. Nobody makes a dramatic prestige miniseries about the brothers who sensibly protected the regional supercenter moat, but that is exactly how serious dynasties survive. Not by being the loudest heirs in the room, but by refusing to become the dumbest. Now let's be precise. Saying the trio quietly dominates Michigan does not mean they personally control every institution in the state, like fictional villains in tailored jackets. It means their family company is so embedded in the economic and physical life of the region that Michigan keeps moving through systems the brothers are tied to, whether most residents think about them or not. That is a different kind of dominance. It is not cinematic. It is structural, jobs, supplier relationships, land use, shopping patterns, local tax impacts, suburban development, regional philanthropy, and customer habit all intersect with the family's commercial footprint. In that sense, the brothers do not need to own the whole state symbolically. They only need to remain indispensable in enough of its daily functioning that their influence stays durable. That is what the best private dynasties understand. You do not need applause from everybody. You need relevance that keeps renewing itself. Every refill prescription, every grocery trip, every holiday run, every quick gas stop, every we need one thing stop that turns into a full cart is another tiny renewal of that relevance. Multiply that across years, cities, households, and generations, and you begin to see why this is not just a rich family. It is a family sitting on a privately held regional engine that continues to make Michigan life pass through its orbit. And that brings us to the final tension in the story. Every family empire eventually faces the same test. Can discipline survive prosperity? It is one thing to keep the machine intact when the sibling group still feels close enough to the source of the business. It is another thing entirely when generations widen, heirs multiply, expectations drift, and nobody living remembers what it took to build the thing in the first place. The Meyer brothers, to their credit, have done their part. They held the center, they protected the family position, they did not allow the core asset to get casually fragmented for short-term gain. But every dynasty eventually hands its future to people who did not fight the original battles. That is when patience gets harder. So yes, there is an open question hanging over all of this. Can the system stay coherent in the future? Maybe, maybe not. But here is what cannot really be argued. Hank, Doug, and Mark Meyer represent one of the clearest examples of quiet regional dominance in modern America. They are the richest brother trio, quietly dominating Michigan, not because they shouted their way into power, but because they inherited a brilliantly positioned machine, understood exactly what made it valuable, kept family gravity centered on the core, and continued turning ordinary Midwestern routine into extraordinary private wealth. That is the whole story. They do not dominate the state by being the loudest men in it.